I was 8 years old the first time I baked my own birthday cake. I remember the kitchen lights were dim because the sun had long set by the time I was mixing flour and sugar alone. Mom was busy putting my little brother Ryan to bed. Dad was still at work, or at least that's what Mom said when I asked if he'd be home for dinner. There was no party, no presents waiting on the table, just a box of cake mix I had convinced Mom to buy for another time. That another time never came, so I took matters into my own small hands. I can still see myself standing on a chair to reach the counter, stirring quietly so I wouldn't disturb anyone, as if my very existence needed to remain unnoticed. When the cake was done, I sat at the table and stuck a single candle in it, an old, bent candle I found in the junk drawer. The house was silent except for the muffled drone of the TV in the living room where Mom had dozed off. In that lonely silence, I lit the candle and softly sang happy birthday to myself. The tiny flame flickered, reflecting in my eyes, brimming with tears. I made a wish, please let someone care about me someday. Then I blew out the candle in one quick, sad breath. The flame vanished, and with it the fragile hope that maybe someone would come by and ruffle my hair or say, "Oh, is it today? Happy birthday." But no one came into the kitchen. No one said a word. It was as if my birthday hadn't even happened. It wasn't that my family didn't celebrate special occasions at all. They did, just not mine. My younger brother Ryan's birthday, for instance, was practically a holiday in our house. He's 2 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, it felt like he became the sun in our family's solar system, while I was pushed out to the far cold edges. For Ryan's birthdays, nothing was spared. Mom spent weeks planning themed parties with bright decorations and a custom cake, and Dad even took the day off to play host and grill burgers, proudly boasting to guests about Ryan's latest Little League trophy, or honor roll certificate. The house would brim with people, music, and laughter, everything I ever wished my birthday could have. One year, not long after one of Ryan's big parties, I asked Mom why we never did anything for my birthday. I was 10, standing at her side as she washed dishes, my heart thudding in my chest. "Mom," I murmured, "maybe next year could I have a little party too?" She didn't stop scrubbing the pan. "Oh, honey," she said with a slight sigh. "Birthdays just aren't that important, especially once you're older. Ryan's little. He cares about these things. You're a big boy now." A big boy. I was 10, but apparently already too grown for cake and parties. I bit back my disappointment as best I could. In the living room, Ryan was zooming around with his new remote-controlled car under Dad's delighted gaze. Shoulders slumped, I retreated upstairs. On my bed, I buried my face in the pillow and let the tears come, making sure to cry silently. It was easier to pretend I didn't care than to let them see how much it hurt. My father, Thomas, was a practical man, strict stoic, and not one for frivolities like celebrating birthdays. At least that was his excuse when it came to me. If I ever dared hint that I wanted something for my birthday, he'd grunt. "You want a reward for just existing. Focus on earning real achievements." Funny enough, when Ryan's birthday rolled around, that stern philosophy vanished. Dad would turn into the proud papa gifting Ryan a new bicycle or the latest video game with a big congratulatory grin. With me, he acted like celebrating the day I was born was an indulgence I hadn't earned. My mother, Elaine, followed Dad's lead. I sometimes caught a flicker of guilt in her eyes when she brushed off my birthday, but she never pushed back against him. She was always busy either chasing after hyperactive Ryan or organizing some community event. Mom loved being seen as the perfect parent to the outside world. At school functions or PTA meetings, she'd brag about Ryan's artwork or his grades to anyone who'd listen. I was there too, but if I mentioned something I was proud of, she'd pat my shoulder. Say, "That's nice, dear," and then shift the conversation right back to Ryan. My accomplishments always felt like an afterthought if they were acknowledged at all. So I learned to make myself small. If I didn't expect anything, then it wouldn't hurt so much when I got nothing. By the time I turned 13, I stopped reminding my parents it was my birthday. That year, a couple friends at school remembered and shared a cupcake with me at lunch, and for a moment, I felt a bit of warmth. But when I walked through the front door at home that evening, nothing was different. Mom asked how school was. Dad gave me a brief nod from behind his newspaper. No mention of my birthday at all. Fine, I answered quietly, swallowing the bitterness. I headed to my room, told myself I didn't care, and tried to ignore the hollow ache in my chest. Later that night, I heard laughter echoing up the stairs. Dad and Mom were watching TV with Ryan, all of them chuckling at some comedy show, or perhaps just enjoying each other's company. I crept halfway down the stairs and peered through the railing at them. They looked so happy, so normal, like a perfect little family. Except, I wasn't really part of it, was I? I was more like a ghost haunting the periphery of their lives. Sitting there in the dark unseen, I felt a familiar mix of loneliness and anger swelling inside me. I pressed my back against the wall and whispered to myself, one day, they'll have to notice me. It was half prayer, half promise. In the quiet that followed, I made a vow. I didn't know when or how, and I certainly didn't know what it would cost, but I knew someday I would stop being invisible. Someday, I would make them see me. That was the seed planted in my heart, a seed of pain and yearning that would years later grow into something far larger and more intense than I could have imagined. The years rolled on, and my hope that things might change gradually faded. By high school, I fully understood my place in the family. I was the afterthought. Still, a part of me clung to the idea that maybe as I got older, Mom or Dad would finally realize how unfair it was. That hope flared around big milestones, only to be inevitably snuffed out. On my 16th birthday, for instance, I tried not to expect anything, but a sliver of hope lingered. 16 is a big deal, right? That morning, I came downstairs and casually mentioned, "Hey, I'm 16 today." Mom looked up from the stove and gave a brief, distracted smile. "Oh, that's right. Happy birthday, honey," she said before returning to flipping pancakes. Dad muttered a gruff, "Happy birthday," from behind his newspaper. And that was it. No cake, no gift, not even a family dinner. That afternoon, Dad handed me the lawnmower and told me to take care of the yard as if it were any other day. I did it without protest, fighting back the sting in my eyes as I pushed the mower and told myself I shouldn't have expected anything different. 2 years later, when Ryan turned 16, it was a completely different story. I was a senior in high school, then preparing to head off to college soon, and Ryan was the golden boy sophomore. For weeks leading up to his birthday, the house was abuzz with planning. Mom booked a venue at a local park for a big outdoor party, sent out glossy invitation cards, and spent days with Ryan picking out a theme. He chose a sports theme, of course. I watched silently as she helped him decorate stringing banners that read, "Happy 16th birthday" in bold letters. Banners I never saw for me. Dad was equally enthusiastic. He kept teasing Ryan about a big surprise gift that he had in store. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach, but it was impossible not to compare. The day of Ryan's 16th birthday party arrived bright and warm. Dozens of guests showed up. All the family friends, our relatives, Ryan's buddies from school. Everyone came to celebrate him. I hung around the edges of the celebration, playing the role of the polite older brother. I helped set up tables, carried out the cooler full of sodas, even manned the grill for a while so Dad could go mingle. Inside, I felt like I was made of glass, see-through and fragile, on the verge of shattering. Memories of my own non-event of a 16th birthday kept flooding back, each happy laugh at this party, twisting the knife deeper. But I kept a smile on my face, determined not to ruin Ryan's day. After all, none of this was his fault, I told myself. He had no control over our parents' favoritism. Then came the moment that broke something inside me. After cake and games, Dad called everyone's attention. He was standing with an arm around Ryan, jingling a set of car keys in his free hand. My heart sank even before the words left his mouth. "Ryan, how about a drive?" Dad nodded towards the driveway with a broad grin. We all trailed to the front yard as Dad revealed the surprise parked at the curb was a shiny used car. A blue sedan with a giant red bow on the hood. Ryan gasped in delight, eyes wide. Guests applauded and whistled. Mom dabbed happy tears from her eyes as Ryan threw his arms around our father, thanking him profusely. I stood at the back of the crowd, hands clenched at my sides. They had gotten him a car. A car. The year I turned 16, I got a lawn to mow and a half-hearted happy birthday. But for Ryan, they pulled out all the stops a car and a public presentation of it like he'd won the lottery. I felt a hot rush of resentment mix with deep sadness. It took all my effort not to let the tears that burned in my eyes fall in front of everyone. I slipped away while they were all busy admiring the car. My chest was heaving, and I needed to breathe away from the cheers and camera flashes. I walked behind a large oak tree at the edge of the park and just stood there trembling with emotion. Anger, envy, hurt. They all swirled in me like a storm I could barely contain. When I finally returned to the party, most people were busy eating or crowding around the new car. I congratulated Ryan quietly, and he beamed at me, completely oblivious to my turmoil. I realized then that even he probably assumed I didn't mind. Why would he think otherwise? I had never made a scene, never protested my lot in life. To him, I was just the chill older brother who didn't care about birthdays and such. That realization made me feel even more alone. Even my brother, who I loved despite everything, couldn't see my pain. As the party wound down and the guests departed, I started helping Mom pick up trash and fold tables. My movements were stiff, my mind a million miles away. Dad was locking up the new car, and Ryan was inside excitedly calling one of his friends to brag about it. At one point, Mom paused and looked at me, maybe noticing my silence. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked softly. Something in me snapped, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the cold, brittle way ice cracks under pressure. I set down the stack of plates I was carrying. "No, Mom. Actually, I'm not okay," I said, my voice shaking despite trying to sound calm. She blinked, clearly caught off guard. My mother wasn't used to me asserting any complaint. "What's wrong?" she asked. I opened my mouth, years of pent-up hurt threatening to pour out. But just then, Dad came over, jovial and oblivious. "Great party, huh?" he said to both of us, then noticed our faces. "What's going on?" I swallowed hard. The confrontation I'd been avoiding for years suddenly felt unavoidable. "I was just telling Mom how I feel," I said, trying to keep my voice even. My heart was pounding. This was it, a chance to speak up. "It was a great party for Ryan. You two really went all out for his 16th birthday." I heard the edge in my own tone. Dad gave a proud grin, clearly not catching my drift yet. "Of course, 16's a big deal." I nodded slowly, my eyes stinging. "It is. It was a big deal for me too. But you didn't do any of this when I turned 16. My voice trembled at the end, despite my attempt to control it. The smile faded from Dad's face. He looked at me, as if only just realizing that fact. "Well, your situation was different," he replied gruffly after a pause. I could feel years of hurt boiling up. "How exactly was it different?" I asked, my voice low. Mom stepped forward, anxiously placing a hand on my arm, but I gently pulled away. I wasn't going to be quiet this time. Dad's brows knitted together. He wasn't used to me questioning him. "We didn't think you cared about that stuff. You were always so independent. You never asked for parties or presents." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. It sounded more like a choke. "I never asked because I knew you'd say no. I learned not to expect anything because every time I hoped I got nothing." My words spilled out faster now, years of restraint breaking. Mom looked away, guilt flickering in her expression. Dad's frown deepened. "Look," he said sternly, lowering his voice. "This isn't the time or place. It was Ryan's day, and we're not going to make it about you feeling sorry for yourself." The phrase "feeling sorry for yourself" hit me like a slap. My face burned. All my hurt was being reduced to me being selfish in his eyes. I struggled to keep my composure. "I'm not trying to make it about me," I said, teeth nearly gritted. "All I want is to understand why he gets everything I never did." Dad's expression hardened. "Life isn't equal, okay? You should be happy for your brother. We've given you food, shelter, education. Stop acting like we've mistreated you just because we didn't throw some parties." Each dismissive word felt like a punch to the gut. Mistreated? Did he really not see it? I opened my mouth to argue, but he cut me off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Enough, Connor." He snapped. It was rare for him to even say my name. Hearing it like that only underscored how serious he was. "This conversation is over. Be grateful for what you have. If you're going to sulk, do it in your room, not here." Tears of frustration gathered in my eyes. I blinked them back, refusing to break down in front of him. Mom whispered my name, her voice pleading, but I couldn't deal with any of it anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving the half-cleaned party behind. As I slipped into the house and up the stairs, I heard Dad mutter something to Mom like, "Kids these days, always ungrateful," and it took all my willpower not to scream. In my room, I closed the door and finally let the tears fall freely. Rage and sorrow warred inside me. I felt humiliated for having even tried to speak up. In Dad's eyes, I was just a petulant child throwing a pity party. Maybe I was foolish to expect any understanding. I stared at myself in the mirror, eyes red and face hot, and I didn't recognize the person looking back. There was so much bitterness there, so much hurt. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept replaying the argument in my head, thinking of all the things I could have said differently, all the things I still wanted to say. But deep down, a cold realization set in. Nothing I said would change them. They would never treat me the way they treated Ryan. The injustice of it all pressed on my chest, like a weight heavier than ever. By the time the sun rose the next day, I felt numb and empty. In the span of those few hours, something inside me had shifted. The quiet promise I'd made to myself years ago to make them see me one day was no longer just a distant fantasy. It was starting to feel like a necessity, a last resort for my own sanity. But before any thoughts of how I might do that could form, I had to endure the aftermath of my failed attempt to seek fairness. Little did I know my toughest days were still ahead, and I was about to sink even deeper before I could ever rise. I left for college with my relationship to my parents hanging by a thread. After the confrontation at Ryan's party, Dad and I barely spoke for the rest of that summer. So when move-in day came, there were no sentimental goodbyes or proud send-offs. In fact, my parents didn't come with me at all. I packed up my few belongings into my beat-up old car, the one I'd bought myself with summer jobs, and drove to campus alone. As I arrived and saw other freshmen unloading cars with help from doting moms and dads, a hollow ache settled in my chest. I was alone like I'd always been. The first few months of college were a blur of lectures, labs, and long nights, but no matter how busy I kept myself, the loneliness clung to me. I had hoped that getting away from home would alleviate some of the pain, that maybe here I could reinvent myself, or at least escape the constant reminders of my family's neglect. But I quickly learned you can't outrun the feelings that live inside you. In the evenings after classes, my dorm mates would call their parents to chat or ask for advice. I'd hear guys in my hall laughing on the phone, updating their families about their day. I never made those calls. The idea of dialing home filled me with a mix of anger and sorrow. What would I even say? There was no "how's college, son" call coming from my dad. No care packages or check-in texts from Mom. The silence from my family was deafening, but not surprising. I kept my head down and tried to focus on my studies. For a while, I poured all my energy into classes determined to prove to myself more than anyone that I didn't need their support to succeed. My schedule was relentless. I signed up for extra courses, joined study groups, took on a part-time job at the library to cover textbooks and food. From dawn until past midnight, I kept myself occupied. On the outside, it might have even looked like I was thriving. But inside, cracks were forming. My 19th birthday came around in the middle of first semester. By then, I had a couple of acquaintances on my floor, and when one of them found out it was my birthday, he got a group together to take me out for cheap pizza. I smiled and went along grateful not to be alone that night. At the little celebration, I got a few playful punches on the arm, a slice of cake with a candle, and an off-key happy birthday sung by near strangers. It was awkward, but sweet, and I appreciated their effort. Yet when I checked my phone at the end of the night, there wasn't a single message from my family. Not even a text from Mom. I shouldn't have been surprised this was par for the course, but it still hurt more than I wanted to admit. I lay in my dorm bed after everyone had gone, staring at the dark ceiling and feeling that old, familiar emptiness expanding inside me. Even miles away, I was still the forgotten child. As the semester wore on, the weight of everything grew heavier. Without any emotional support, the stresses of college started to overwhelm me. I was sleeping less and less, either kept up by racing thoughts or nightmares of arguments with my father. In one recurring dream, I'd be shouting in a void while my parents walked away, never once looking back. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed. My grades, once stellar, began to slip. It's not that I suddenly lost my ability or drive, but studying became harder as my mind often wandered to dark places. During lectures, I'd catch myself staring blankly, not hearing a word the professor said. At the library, I'd read the same page of a textbook over and over without absorbing it. The anger and sadness I carried were like a constant background noise I couldn't tune out. By the time winter rolled around, I hit my lowest point. One chilly evening, after receiving an email warning that my GPA was dropping close to the limit for keeping my academic scholarship, I felt something inside me break. That scholarship was my lifeline. Without it, I couldn't afford tuition. The thought of losing it, of possibly having to drop out and crawl back home in defeat, was terrifying. I knew my parents wouldn't save me. If anything, Dad would probably just say I told you to focus, or worse, use it as proof that I was the failure he always suspected I might be. The pressure, the loneliness, the years of bottled-up pain, all of it came crashing down that night. I remember it was snowing lightly outside. My roommate was away, and the dorm was quiet. I sat at my desk, that warning email open on my laptop screen, and my vision blurred with tears. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I slammed the laptop shut and sank to the floor, my back against the bed, and I just cried. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that I buried into my folded arms. All the frustration of trying so hard and still feeling like nothing. All the longing for a family that cared, all the fear of failing. I let it all pour out. In that moment, I felt completely and utterly alone, like a small boat lost at sea with no land in sight. A frightening thought flickered through my mind. If I disappeared, would anyone even notice? The fact I didn't have a good answer to that question made my chest ache even more. I wondered if all my striving was pointless. Every memory of my parents' indifference played in my head like a cruel montage. The missed birthdays, the empty seats at my graduation, the look of annoyance on Dad's face when I pleaded for fairness. A wave of despair washed over me, so intense that I struggled to breathe. I wasn't just crying for the email or the scholarship, I was crying for every year of my life that I had felt unloved and invisible. I'm not sure how long I sat there on the cold linoleum floor of my dorm. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, the sobs subsided, leaving me drained and hollow. I felt like I was at the bottom of a deep, dark well with no light above. This, I realized, was my rock bottom. I had never felt so hopeless. In that bleak emptiness, I thought about giving up on school, on trying to prove myself, maybe on everything. There seemed to be no point in fighting so hard to be seen or heard when the people I yearned for acknowledgement from didn't care. That night, I scribbled in my journal through tears, writing down every raw feeling inside me. I wrote things I'd never dared say out loud, that I hated my father at that moment, that I felt like a fool for still craving my mother's affection, that sometimes I wished I had been born into a different family, or not born at all. The words blurred with tear stains, but I kept writing until my hand cramped and the pen ink ran dry. Pouring my pain onto the page was the only way to survive those dark hours. At some point past midnight, exhaustion finally overtook me. I crawled into bed without bothering to change out of my clothes. My pillow was damp beneath my cheek. In the darkness, I felt a tiny flickering resolve somewhere deep inside, a faint spark that refused to die out completely. Maybe it was the same part of me that had survived all those lonely birthdays and broken promises. As I drifted into a fitful sleep, that spark held on. Rock bottom or not, some stubborn part of me wasn't ready to let go. Little did I know life had plans for that small spark. It wouldn't be long before something or someone came along and offered me a hand out of that dark well. But on that night, in the depths of my despair, I couldn't imagine any light in my future. I felt utterly defeated, unaware that the turning point I so desperately needed was just around the corner. It's strange how the darkest nights can produce the brightest stars. Not long after my breakdown, life handed me a lifeline in the form of a professor, Dr. Meredith Green, my freshman English instructor. She was one of those rare teachers who truly cared about her students. After noticing my grades slip and my quiet demeanor in class, she invited me to her office. I expected a reprimand, but instead, she asked how I was really doing. There was such genuine concern in her voice that I found myself admitting in halting words that I was having a hard time. I didn't divulge everything, but I shared enough that she understood I was carrying heavy emotional baggage. Dr. Green listened kindly, then handed me a beautiful bound journal. "You have a lot to say," she told me softly. "Try writing it down." It felt almost like permission to let it all out. That night, I opened the journal and began to write, but this time, I wrote with purpose. I crafted a story out of my pain, about a boy whose family never celebrated him, about longing and hurt. It was the most honest thing I'd ever written. Not long after our class was assigned to write a personal narrative essay, I decided to polish that story and turn it in. It was terrifying to reveal so much of myself on the page, but I trusted Dr. Green. A week later, she returned my paper with tears in her eyes and pulled me aside. "This is powerful," she said. "Your voice needs to be heard." I was stunned. No one had ever told me I had a voice worth hearing. She asked if I would consider letting the campus literary magazine publish it. Nervous but proud, I agreed. A month later, my essay titled "The Invisible Sun" was published in the student magazine. When it went live, the response was overwhelming. Students I barely knew approached me to say they'd read it and that it moved them deeply. Some shared their own experiences of feeling overlooked or second best. Others simply offered a heartfelt thank you for speaking up about a topic so many avoid. For the first time in my life, being seen, truly seen, didn't terrify me. It felt affirming, validating. That experience lit a spark in me. I realized I wasn't alone, and more importantly, that maybe my experiences could help others. With new determination, I switched my major to psychology, eager to understand the effects of family dynamics and neglect. My studies suddenly felt urgent and personal. Rather than wallowing in resentment, I channeled my energy into excelling academically and growing emotionally. I even joined a mentorship program, volunteering to help local teens who were going through tough times. Sharing bits of my story with those kids, watching them realize someone understood them, was incredibly healing for me as well. Once I found my purpose, I thrived. My grades shot back up and I poured myself into research. In my senior year, I conducted a project on the psychological impact of parental favoritism. It won a university award and led to an invitation to present at a regional psychology conference. Standing at a podium presenting my findings to experts in the field was daunting, but I drew strength from remembering how far I'd come. The presentation was a success. Several academics praised my insights and encouraged me to publish my work. I felt a swell of pride and confidence that I'd never felt before. I started to think, maybe I am worth celebrating after all. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family remained distant, but now it no longer devastated me. It motivated me. I kept in touch on my own terms. I'd make a brief call to my mom on holidays or birthdays, hers not mine. Mine still went unnoticed by them just to let them know I was doing fine. Our conversations were surface level. She'd tell me how Ryan was thriving in college and how Dad was busy with work. She seldom asked about my achievements, and I didn't volunteer them. I had stopped expecting praise or interest long ago. The difference was, by then, I didn't need their approval. I was carving out my identity without them. Each honor I earned, each person I helped, each paper I published, those were my affirmations. I learned to celebrate my own milestones, whether anyone else did or not. The hurt they caused was still a part of me, but I was no longer defined by it. Instead, I was defined by what I'd done in spite of it. This turning point in my life wasn't a single moment, but a series of them, each one building my strength and self-worth. I felt a growing sense of justice too, a quiet conviction that one day I would stand in the light and they would have no choice but to see me. It wasn't about revenge in a cruel sense. I didn't want to hurt them physically or ruin their lives, but I did want recognition. To finally tip the scales of validation. The seed of an idea was planted in my mind that when the time was right, I would make a statement so bold that my family could never ignore or belittle it. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but as I advanced into graduate school and then into my early career, that idea stayed with me, growing stronger by the year. I went on to earn my graduate degree with a focus on trauma and family psychology, graduating at the top of my class. In my mid-20s, I was steadily building a name for myself in my field. I authored a couple of scholarly articles that gained traction, and I spoke at various seminars and community events about the effects of childhood emotional neglect. Each new achievement felt like another brick in the foundation of the life I built for myself. A life far removed from that lonely suburban house of my childhood. With every step forward, the idea of making a grand statement grew less like a fantasy and more like an inevitable destiny. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it yet, but I knew one day I'd create a moment that would force my family to finally acknowledge me. I didn't intend to plot revenge immediately, but as my confidence grew, a vision of poetic justice formed in my mind. It would be a grand statement delivered on my terms. The pieces fell into place slowly, and then, all at once. In my late 20s, I received an email inviting me to speak at a TEDx conference. An organizer had read one of my research articles and felt my insights on childhood neglect would inspire a broad audience. My heart pounded as I read the invitation. This was the kind of platform I had dreamed of, one with global reach. As we discussed scheduling, I noticed one of the available dates for my talk was September 18th. My stomach flipped. That was the exact date of Ryan's upcoming wedding. My mother had told me months ago when and where it would be, assuming I'd attend. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Step 1. I confirmed my speaking slot for September 18th without hesitation. The organizers were delighted I chose that day. They had no idea why I was so certain. Step 2. I kept it to myself. As the months passed, I meticulously prepared my TEDx talk. I poured all my professional knowledge and personal experience into a powerful script. I planned to open with my own story of being the invisible sibling. Not naming names, of course, but Any member of my family listening would know exactly who I was talking about. The talk would then expand into the psychological research and findings, essentially turning my personal vindication into a lesson on empathy and the importance of valuing every child. I wanted it to hit hard, to make audiences feel, and to spark conversation. I practiced relentlessly, standing in front of my mirror at midnight reciting lines that made me tremble with emotion. This was going to be the most important speech of my life, and not just because of my career. It was going to be the culmination of decades of hurt and healing. Step 3. Ensure my absence at the wedding would be known. When the formal wedding invitation arrived, I delayed sending any response. Eventually, about a month before the event, Mom called me, bubbling with excitement about the big day and asking about my travel plans. I took a breath and calmly told her, "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to attend the wedding." The stunned silence on her end was almost satisfying. She asked what could possibly keep me away from my own brother's wedding. I told her the truth. I had been invited to give a TED Talk. I explained briefly what that was, and it was scheduled for the same day. She didn't take it well. First came disbelief, then guilt-tripping. "Can't you do it some other time? Family comes first," she insisted, growing agitated. I held my ground politely but firmly. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me. I've worked for years for this, Mom," I said. She fell into an offended silence before hurriedly passing the phone to my father. Dad was livid. He demanded to know how I could prioritize some work event over my brother. For so long I'd swallowed my feelings around him, but now I spoke calmly and confidently. "Dad, I know this is hard to accept, but my talk is extremely important to me. I'm not choosing work over family to spite anyone. I'm doing what I have to do for my career and myself." He bristled, interpreting it as a betrayal. He warned me that if I skipped the wedding, I shouldn't expect to be welcomed at home again. Perhaps in the past, that threat would have devastated me. Now it barely registered. "I'll be sorry to miss the day, but I understand your position," I answered evenly. That only angered him more, and the call ended with him hanging up after a curt, "Fine, do what you want." Step 4. Set the stage for impact. I wasn't content with simply missing the wedding. I wanted to ensure that my talk would make waves. I reached out to some contacts I had made in the media during my research work. I let them know I would be speaking about a very personal journey and some groundbreaking insights on a public stage, hinting that it might be worth covering. Some local journalists and bloggers took interest. I also subtly mentioned on my social media that I was preparing for the biggest speech of my life, without mentioning the wedding conflict. Word began to trickle through the grapevine among old acquaintances and extended family that I had something major happening on the same day as Ryan's ceremony. I knew curiosity was brewing. Step 5. Execution. The morning of September 18th arrived. In a city auditorium hundreds of miles from my hometown, I stood backstage at the TEDx venue, clipboard in hand, going over my notes one last time. I was dressed in a sharp suit, a tiny microphone attached to my ear. My presentation slides were queued up. Back home, my family would be gathering at the church around this same time, likely muttering about my empty seat. I felt a flutter of nerves, not from doubt, but from anticipation. About an hour before I went on stage, I received a polite text from my brother's fiancée saying they were sad I couldn't be there, but they hoped to celebrate together another time. I sent a cordial reply wishing them a wonderful wedding and turned off my phone. From this moment, I was unreachable. My focus had to be absolute. I stepped up to the edge of the curtain and peered at the crowd assembling. A few hundred people filling the rows, the TEDx logo glowing on the big screen. I took a deep breath. I thought of all the lonely birthdays and all the quiet victories that had led me here. In that split second, I felt past and present collide. The child who was ignored and the man who refused to be overlooked any longer. When my name was announced and I walked onto the round red carpet of the TED stage, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. I was about to flip the narrative of my life in one bold stroke. I straightened my posture, clicked my presentation remote, and began to speak. Standing on that stage under bright lights, I delivered the talk of my life. I spoke with raw honesty, describing a little boy who baked his own birthday cake and grew up feeling invisible. I wove my personal story into a wider message about neglect and the need to value every child. The audience was riveted. Some wiped away tears, others nodded in empathy. When I finished with a heartfelt plea for compassion, the auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. In that moment, I felt a surge of vindication. Strangers had heard me and cared. I had finally been seen. After the event, I was swarmed by attendees sharing their reactions and even their own stories. My heart was soaring. Backstage, once I was alone, I powered my phone on. Instantly, a flood of notifications appeared. Messages of congratulations from colleagues and friends. Amid them, I noticed several missed calls from my parents' number. My stomach tightened. Before I could decide whether to call them, my cousin Jenna's name lit up with an incoming call. I answered, and Jenna sounded breathless. "Connor, your talk? It's all over social media here. People at the wedding saw an article about it." My pulse quickened. Jenna hesitated, then added, "Your parents found out. Your dad walked out of the reception. He's really upset." We hung up as another call buzzed in, my parents' home line again. I braced myself and answered. "Hello?" My father's voice came on low and seething, barely controlled. "How could you do this to us?" I let out a slow breath. "Do what, Dad? How could you broadcast our private business to the world?" he snarled. "You humiliated your mother and me in front of everyone. If telling the truth humiliated you, that's on you," I replied, surprisingly calm. In the background, I heard my mother crying my name, but Dad was on a roll. "We raised you, gave you everything, and you twist the story to make us villains," he shouted. "Those people out there don't know us. They only heard your little sob story." I felt a flare of anger. My sob story is my life, and it happens to be true. I didn't name you, but if you feel attacked by the truth of my experiences, maybe you should reflect on why that is. "We never meant to hurt you," my mother interjected, her voice trembling. "You were never supposed to feel hurt." I finished for her. My composure slipped a bit as years of pain sharpened my tone. "Well, I was hurt. For a long time. And whenever I tried to tell you, you brushed me aside. Remember when you told me birthdays aren't important, or that I should be happy for my brother? I needed you, and you weren't there. So I found others who would listen." Dad scoffed bitterly. "You think blabbing family matters to strangers makes you some kind of hero? You've made us a laughingstock in town." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. I'm not a hero. But I'm not invisible anymore either. I told the truth because it mattered to me, and apparently to a lot of others out there. I'm sorry if it embarrasses you, but I won't apologize for speaking up after a lifetime of being silenced. There was a pause, filled only by my mother's soft sobs. Then my father spoke, voice cold as ice. "You're no son of mine. You understand, don't bother coming back here." His words were heavy, but I heard the unmistakable pain underneath his anger. A lump rose in my throat. I swallowed hard. "If that's how you feel, okay," I answered quietly. I'd expected this, but it still hurt hearing it aloud. My father lingered a moment as if weighing a final retort, but said nothing. I just heard him breathing, and my mother whispering something indecipherable through her tears. Before either could speak again, the line cut off. He had hung up. I lowered the phone and realized my hands were shaking. That was it. The confrontation I'd anticipated for years had finally happened, not face to face, but in the harshest of phone calls. I had stood my ground and spoken my truth, and now I was effectively cast out. In the span of a day, I had gained an audience of thousands and lost whatever remained of my relationship with my parents. I stepped outside the venue's back door into the cool evening air, sucking in a deep breath. My cheeks were wet. I hadn't noticed I was crying. I wiped the tears away with trembling fingers. Oddly, I didn't feel regret. I felt sorrow, yes, mourning what could have been, perhaps, but also a grim sense of justice. Everything was out in the open now. They finally heard me. Whether they accepted it or not, the truth had been spoken. Above me, the stars were beginning to peek out in the dusk sky. Somewhere hours away, my brother's wedding celebration was winding down, forever marked by the drama I'd set in motion. I wondered what he was feeling, what my parents were saying about me at that moment. That image could have made me feel guilty, but I reminded myself why I'd done it. This wasn't about ruining their day. It was about reclaiming my own life. As I stood there, I realized I had reached the point of no return. The climax had come and gone in a fury of words and revelations, and despite the ache in my chest, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The worst was over. I had nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. In the chaos of that call, I hadn't even directly spoken to Ryan. Part of me wondered whether my brother would ever forgive me for the way I stole a piece of his spotlight. A part of me hoped that someday he might understand why I did it, that it wasn't truly about him at all. As for my mother, her sobs on the phone echoed in my head. I knew she was hurt and probably ashamed, and that pained me. But I also knew I had tried to spare her this pain by seeking her empathy countless times in the past. Now finally, she had no choice but to face what I'd been living with inside. In the days and weeks that followed, the dust slowly settled. My TEDx talk was uploaded online, and much to my astonishment, it went viral. Thousands upon thousands of people around the world saw it. Comments and messages poured in, many from strangers thanking me for sharing what felt like their story too, others from parents saying it opened their eyes. In the court of public opinion, my story struck a chord. In that sense, my act of revenge had a far greater impact than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was sparking conversations in households I'd never met. It was a justice of its own kind, shining light on an injustice that is usually hidden in the shadows of happy family facades. But what of my own family? In the immediate aftermath, my father kept his word. I was effectively cut off. He didn't call, didn't write. My mother, however, reached out quietly a week after the wedding. She sent me a long email that must have been incredibly difficult for her to write. In it, she apologized, truly apologized, for the years of neglect. She admitted that she and Dad had been blind to how their behavior affected me. I thought I was just keeping peace in the family by coddling your brother, she wrote, but I realize now I was breaking your heart in the process. I am so sorry, my son. Her words were full of regret and love, and I wept as I read them. It wasn't a complete healing of all wounds, but it was a start. I replied to her, and over the next few weeks we began to have tentative phone conversations, always when Dad was out of the house. She told me that my talk had been like a mirror held up to her. She had forced herself to watch it online after the anger had cooled, and it shattered her to realize the pain I'd been carrying. She didn't make excuses. She said she had no excuse, only a promise that if I ever allowed her back in my life, she would never ignore me again. I cautiously opened my heart to her. Trust once broken is slow to mend, but I could hear the earnestness in her voice. It was bittersweet. I got the acknowledgement I had craved, but it came so late after so much damage. My brother, too, reached out. A couple weeks after the wedding, he called me. To my surprise, he wasn't calling to yell. He actually apologized, if you can believe it. He said he hadn't fully understood until he watched my talk. Yes, he watched it too. How badly I'd felt growing up. I knew Mom and Dad treated us differently, he admitted, but I never saw it from your perspective. I'm sorry I didn't do anything. I was a kid, I didn't know. But still. I could hear the mixture of guilt and confusion in his voice. It wasn't easy for him. He was essentially grappling with the fact that our happy childhood memories together were tainted by an injustice he had been mostly oblivious to. I told him I didn't blame him at all. He had been a child just as I was. The fact that he reached out to me meant a lot. We talked for a long time that night, not just about the past, but about his wedding, which despite everything had gone on, albeit with some awkwardness, after Dad's blow-up, and about our lives. For the first time in ages, it felt like we were real brothers having an honest, heartfelt conversation without Dad or Mom's shadow between us. As for my father, he remained silent. My mother hinted that he had watched the video of my talk as well alone in his study, but he never spoke a word of it to her or anyone else as far as I know. She said he teared up watching it, something I'd almost never seen my father do. Yet his pride and stubbornness kept him from contacting me. In his eyes, I had betrayed the family by airing our dirt in public, and that was an unforgivable sin. Perhaps time will soften that stance, perhaps not. That's a consequence I was prepared to live with. It's sad to say, but losing my father's approval hurts far less when I've lived my whole life without feeling I truly had it anyway. There were other consequences too. Extended family and townspeople took sides, I heard. Some labeled me the ungrateful son. Others quietly commended me for speaking up. My parents, once known for being such supportive, wonderful parents in our community, suddenly had a less shiny reputation. I can't pretend I didn't feel a grim satisfaction in that. It wasn't that I wanted to ruin them, but a part of me felt it was only fair that the world saw a truer picture of what lay behind our picture-perfect front. Still knowing I was the cause of their embarrassment brought with it a pang of guilt. Revenge is complex like that. Satisfying, yes, but also messy. You get what you wanted, but you might lose other things along the way. In my case, what I gained was a sense of justice and self-worth that I'd never had before. What I lost was the illusion that my family could ever go back to what it once was, but maybe that's for the best. The truth is, the family I had before wasn't healthy for me. Now at least everything is out in the open. Maybe one day my father will swallow his pride and will reconcile. I won't hold my breath, but my door will remain open should he ever choose to walk through it. Importantly, I've also gained a whole community of support. In sharing my story, I inadvertently became a bit of an advocate for others who were neglected or cast aside. I've connected with so many people who reached out after hearing my talk. We've formed a sort of online support network, cheering each other on. In a way, my circle of care widened, even as my immediate family ties frayed. Life has a way of giving you new love when old love fails you. Reflecting on everything I do, feel vindicated, but it's a bittersweet vindication. On one hand, I achieved precisely what I set out to do. I made my family finally acknowledge my existence and my worth. No one in my family will ever dare say again that my birthday or any part of my life isn't important. I ensured that by aligning my biggest triumph with the day of my brother's wedding. Indeed, in the aftermath, the local news that covered events of that weekend devoted more airtime to excerpts of my TEDx talk than to the wedding announcements page. In terms of public recognition, I won. On the other hand, revenge didn't magically fix the past or erase the hurt. It didn't suddenly turn my father into the loving parent I always wanted, or rewind time so that little boy isn't left alone on his birthday. What it did do was give me closure. It was like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is where the old story ends and my new story begins. I used to yearn desperately for their validation. Now, I don't need it. I have my own. The cost of that transformation was high. I paid for it with tears, with the upheaval of my family's relationships, and with a piece of my heart that still aches for what could have been. But despite that cost, I find myself at peace with my choice. Sometimes justice isn't neat and pretty. Sometimes it's rough-edged and painful, even as it sets you free. In the end, my story became something bigger than just payback. It became about healing and self-respect. My family may never be the same, but neither will I. And that's a good thing. I am stronger, freer, and finally seen for who I am. That quiet, overlooked kid has grown into a man who commands attention on his own terms. And that, to me, is justice served at last. Looking back on everything now, I feel a strange sense of calm. My journey was painful and messy, but it was real, and it was mine. I'm not that voiceless child anymore. I'm a grown man who stood up and said I matter and proved it to himself and the world. It's a feeling that's hard to describe, equal parts sorrow for what was lost and hope for what's ahead. The boy who used to make secret wishes over a lone birthday candle finally got his wish. Not in the way he imagined as a child, but in a way life granted through struggle and determination. If there's one lesson I take from all this, it's that we don't have to remain silent when we're being wronged, even if the people wronging us are our own family. Speaking up is terrifying, I won't lie about that, and seeking justice or acknowledgement can come at a high price. But your dignity and self-worth are worth that risk. Even a small step, confiding in a friend, writing your feelings down, seeking support, can be the start of reclaiming your voice. I spent years believing I was somehow less important, that I didn't deserve celebrations or even basic attention. I internalized the lie that I was the problem for wanting those things. Now I know that was never true. Everyone deserves to feel seen and valued. Sometimes you have to demand that recognition to draw a line and say enough. In my case, I had to shout it to the world. My hope is that if you're in a similar situation, maybe hearing my story can help you find the strength to speak up in your own way. I also learned that family isn't just blood. It's whoever stands by you and sees you. In the aftermath of everything, I found family and supportive friends in my colleagues, even in those strangers who heard my talk and reached out. This past year, for example, I decided to finally celebrate my birthday without waiting for my parents' approval. I gathered a few close friends, my chosen family, and we had the kind of joyful little party I used to only dream about. We ate cake, we laughed loudly, and they even sang happy birthday just for me. I realized I was truly happy on my birthday for the first time in decades. It may sound simple, but for me, it was a milestone I took back that day and made it mine, surrounded by people who cared. That's something younger me would have thought impossible. To anyone out there who has felt ignored or undervalued, I want you to know you're not alone. Maybe your story isn't the same as mine, but that feeling of being unseen is sadly more common than we admit. I see you. Others do too. You are not overreacting or ungrateful for wanting basic love and acknowledgement. You deserve it, and sometimes when it's not given freely, you have to demand it or create it for yourself. I hope you have people in your life who will stand by you. But if you don't, please remember that there is a whole community of people out here, myself included, who understand. Since sharing my story, I've heard from so many who went through similar pain. We've formed an unspoken bond. Even reading the comments and messages from people after my talk has been incredibly healing for me. Each one reminds me that none of us are truly alone when we are willing to speak our truth. Now, as I move forward, I do so with a much lighter heart. I'm focusing on the people who do care and the new chapter ahead of me. My career and advocacy are blooming in ways I never expected, and I'm slowly rebuilding bonds with the family members who are willing. I won't pretend everything is perfect. I'm still working through some scars, but I face the future with optimism. I've been through the fire and come out stronger. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a long, emotional ride, I know, but every bit of it was the truth I needed to tell. Now, I'd genuinely love to hear from you. Have you ever felt invisible or undervalued by those you love? How did you cope, or what did you do to change things? What do you think about the way I handled my situation? Please share your thoughts or your own stories in the comments. I'll be reading them eagerly, and I truly believe that by sharing, we can help lift each other up. Your story might resonate with someone else reading, or your perspective might help me and others grow. Who knows? Maybe sharing your story here could be the first step in your own journey toward healing or justice. If my story struck a chord with you, please consider sharing this video. Maybe it will reach someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. And if you want to join our community for more emotional stories and discussions, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We're building a space where difficult stories can be heard and where healing can start. My tale was one of quiet suffering turned into a loud statement. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but ultimately, it set me free. I hope wherever you are, you find the strength to stand up for yourself and the peace that follows. Remember, even if others ignore you or belittle you, your voice matters. You have the power to make them listen. Take care, and until next time, thank you for watching and being a part of my journey. Your support means the world to me. I'm truly grateful for the chance to share my story and for each and every one of you who listened.